This is the Parents in Sport podcast. Amazing guests, honest conversations, topics that matter.
Welcome to season 5 of the Parents in Sport podcast. I am your host, Gordon MacLelland, and I'm delighted to be joined today by sporting parent Marcia Lewis. Marcia, thank you for joining us on the show.
You're welcome, Gordon. Thank you for having me.
Now, for once, I'm not going to steal anybody's thunder, and I'm going to hand it straight over to you to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. And if you can include your most recent exciting trip to the US, that would be fabulous as well.
Thank you. So I'm Marcia. I'm a mum to a youngster called Myles Lewis-Skelly who has gone through the Arsenal Academy. And I've been supporting Myles on his journey since he was a wee tot. Probably, I think he was in pre-academy from about age 5, and gone from started off at Chelsea Development Centre, went to Arsenal. He's been at Arsenal now. He's now 17. He's a young professional, and yeah, he's enjoying life as a young professional. And I have. Through my experience with Myles, I have set up a platform for parents to support them as they navigate the world of youth football, from grassroots to academy, and that's called Number One Fan Club.
Fantastic. And Marcia, I was delighted to obviously see on The Athletic your interview, and obviously I knew I was having you on, but I was even more delighted in amongst the pre-season coverage to see that Myles also managed to start one of the recent games in the US for Arsenal. I know you were there. I mean, that must have just been a huge thrill for you all.
Absolutely. It's I was extremely happy. I'm always proud. It doesn't matter what he does, but I was happy for him that he's had an amazing experience all pre-season. I think they had 4 games. He actually featured in all 4 games, but the start was, it was a big deal. It was exciting. And he enjoyed the experience being with the team. And given the opportunity, it was amazing and well worth the trip for me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is such a big episode for us. You know, we both, and Marcia and I, work, across football, and we have so many parents of young footballers who listen to the show and jump on to try and navigate, what is a difficult journey from the very start as grassroots players through academy systems, and Myles's journey in many ways, right from the start all the way through, Marcia, is probably quite unique. I mean, I think there's quite a few of them that do get in at the start and go all the way through, but actually that probably isn't the norm per se.
Yeah, I think when we all hear about the statistics of those that get professional contracts or stay in football and actually have a career. And by no means, like, Myles isn't there yet. He's still absolutely at the very early part of, in fact, the most difficult part of the journey. So it would definitely not count on chickens before they hatch. But you got to be in it to win it, I guess. So he's in the right place, getting the right type of support from the club. He's very driven. And I think regardless of the outcome, what we take most from this is actually just how enjoyable it's been, not just for him, but for us as a family. It is a roller coaster of emotions. I'm sure we'll get into that in a moment. But actually, I think where perhaps we might have seen it differently is that we've just enjoyed it for what it is at every stage, rather than thinking about, okay, this could end up in a career. That came later when we realized, oh, actually, he's all right. But for many years, it's just about being there for him, supporting him from the back. We didn't know anything about football. I certainly didn't. His dad knew a bit more than I did, but I don't come from a football background. My dad was a cricketer, so yes, he was an athlete and used to play cricket for the Royal Air Force. But I've got all sisters. There was no football played at all in my family. And right up until probably Myles was about 11 or 12, I really had no idea even what the Premier League was. So I remember starting to try and learn a bit and wondering why these teams are moving position, not realizing that they get 3 points for every game that they win. So it was a real innocence around football and just I used to think of the academy experience as a posh youth club, to be honest. You know, it was free. I was able to juggle it to a certain degree with work. Sometimes that was difficult as well. But you know, he was busy. He was busy and he was being kept active. That they were the two tick boxes that I needed, quite honestly. So yeah,
Fantastic. I mean,
every
it's funny, isn't it? I said to you that we might go off on tangents, and in what you've said already, I've already written down four things because I think there's some really big messaging in this. I think that one of the hardest sells talking to lots of sports parents, not just in football, I think across other sports, is if we're not careful, we miss the journey as we're going through it. We miss the incredible opportunities, the experience. And if we are only looking at the outcome of this is going to be an Olympic medal or international selection or a professional football contract, we are going to be so disappointed by that in the vast majority of cases. And I think that is so important, and certainly for young people with their identities and how they perceive their own self-worth and the things that they do. If that is the only success criteria, we're not doing anything to help them. And actually, my goodness, the skills that Myles will have picked up and you've picked up as a family over the years will have a huge influence on all of you for the rest of your lives as well. And I think that's important. We've got to stop and use it, haven't we, for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the every environment is different, every child is different, and every family is different. So how we all adapt to the situation is going to be very, very different. So from I guess an environment perspective, if we think about the club that Myles is largely growing up in, and even before he was at Arsenal, he had as I said, a year or two in pre-academy at Chelsea. It was an enjoyable experience. He went to Arsenal. It was an enjoyable experience, but we also made sure that our life wasn't made extra difficult. For example, we went to a club that was near home. We didn't have to travel 2 hours 3 times a week around the M25. So that took a stress factor away. You know, things like the tours and the meeting people and the parents. Again, we made sure that we were able to help facilitate. And that's easier when you have, you know, parents who can facilitate both parts of the journey. You know, families come in all shapes and sizes and different backgrounds and cultures, and our ability to support this journey is going to be very, very different. But also, you know, yes, a club does a lot in terms of the skills and the discipline, and they have workshops in lots of different ways. You're learning all sorts of things about life. But we've also done a lot at home
Yeah,
to support that,
absolutely.
right? We've been parents, we've stayed as parents, we've done what we know to do. There's no handbook or rule book, but actually, I think, and I give both myself and his dad and our support network a lot of credit. We've, you know, we there are little things that we've done at home that will make Myles the person that he is
Yeah.
in order to for him to enjoy the experience itself. There's no bones about that. It's not all about what they've learned at the club. It's about that family structure and support at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just you and his dad. And it's nice to hear that, you know, in young people's support, that network is far wider. You know, I'm
Yeah.
conscious when you do parent sessions, well, yeah, there's just you, but there's also grandparents. There might be siblings. There are other family members. And actually, we all know how difficult it can be sometimes with teenagers, where we've all got that lovely phase where basically anything we say doesn't really register. You know, the lovely phase we've all got to go through, and they drive us mad. But actually, young people get their bits of information and support from lots of different avenues, don't they? And it's great to hear that you're mentioning that it's far more than just you and his dad. There's other support,
Yeah.
which is important.
100%. I mean, there's that saying, isn't it, that it takes a village to raise a child, and in our situation, that's been the case. It's been wonderful to share these experiences with the people that have been instrumental in my life and giving me support, not just Myles, but you know, I've had friends who again have all sorts of professions, and you know, I'm able to offload on them or give them a different insight. And actually, when you don't have football as a background, it's amazing the richness of shared experiences you can get that actually helps you in this journey. And I think that's where football maybe needs to look at a bit more when it comes to their own recruitment, their own internal resource pool, is that it's not only football people that can add value to the football industry.
Yeah, I think I love the innocence around that, and I think we're talking that there's two different things for me as somebody who works across sports and being that external eye, having lots of different experiences, working with lots of different coaches, parents, different environments, and seeing it. I think it's important for any industry. I think if you close your shop and and it'd be the same in any business, wasn't it? Oh well, this is just what we do. This is what we do in football. This is what we do here. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean it's always brilliant what we're doing, because who's vetting that sometimes, other than the people who have just always been, maybe in those positions for a long period of time. And I think that, from your point of view, one thing it did make me think about is we've had a few parents who've said, "Oh, Gordon, I don't really know anything about my child's sport. I'm worried that is, that's a bit of a nightmare." And actually, I think the more you dig into it a bit, it's like, yeah, it might be a blessing in disguise as well. And you can see the room, people are like, well, how can that be possible? And I'll tell you why, because it allows you just to be a parent. And there's no blurring of the lines. You're not trying to cover the extra coaching bits. You're not trying to do that. You are just purely being a parent. And because you may not know a lot, you end up then having to ask a lot of questions. So you learn. And as long as you're asking the questions to the right people, or you're asking your child and you're learning as you go, actually that's in some cases far more beneficial than somebody, we've got some ex-professional players who have very openly said to us, bit of a nightmare, Gordon. Son probably was quite good. I tried to do everything that worked for me. I copied and pasted what it was like for me in the 80s and 90s, and the whole thing backfired because my son's nothing like me. He didn't need the type of support I've given him. Yeah, bit of a shocker. And we never hear that. The press never report on that. We always hear the ones who have been able to accelerate development, who have done really well with the kids. And it does work. Of course it does, if you've got some experience. But it's not always the case. It's not a given just because you've done it that it's actually going to then work for how you support your kids.
Exactly. And I think one thing I want to add to that, Gordon, is around, you can ask all the questions in the world, right? But if you're not in this environment, how you ask, I think, is very, very important.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. And I think that no matter you could know a lot about football, but how you communicate your knowledge in an environment that are trying to teach your child also, will be under scrutiny. So communication, I think, is really, really important in how we communicate as parents in this environment, whether you know a lot about football or whether you don't know a lot about football. If you're trying to get information around how your child is doing, or, how they're settling into an environment, just understanding the landscape of football, you can get that information, but it's it's the approach, I think, is really, really important. That's one message I think I would love parents to probably just understand and learn, explore a bit more.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the ability to ask great questions is really important. And I think sometimes when we're trying to find out information, or we're potentially approaching difficult subjects or things that are maybe a little bit emotional, we sometimes fly right in with an opinion or a statement rather than asking a question, because there's always different sides to different stories, right? Through the eyes of a child, through the eyes of a parent, through the eyes of a coach or an organization. And I think our ability to communicate well with each other, and I think of young players that I sort of do sessions with, how confusing must it be for them when two of the most important people in their lives are giving them conflicting messages? And it happens. It happens.
It does. And sometimes, honestly, for me, I also I think about the way in which we are as individuals and our background it has a lot of influence in how we deal with certain things. So I think sometimes when parents act in a certain way, almost it's there may not be self-awareness. They may not have an understanding of their environment. They may not have much of an understanding about themselves. So there's a lot, I think it's quite complex. It's not easy just to say, you've got it wrong, you've said it wrong, you've done it wrong. It's like the why, like how could we do it better? And I think, we're still evolving and learning as individuals in how to be in this environment. And that's tricky, actually. It's quite tricky.
I agree, and I think there's a lot in that in terms of self-awareness. We've been talking a lot about that this week. I think sometimes, in the amazing work that you do, and I think some of the sessions we run, and I've got to the stage with parents, all different, we're all coming at it from different backgrounds. You can tell lots of different stories in the sports world. Some of the things people will be able to connect with, some of the things people will be able to contradict. But actually, we've got to remain really curious and try and evolve and learn, as we go. And do we still always get it right with all the information that we do? Absolutely not. I mean, I probably have some shocking times still with my own children, but the self-awareness piece and the greater knowledge hopefully gives you a better chance of getting it a little bit more right than wrong. But
Mhm.
you can only do that with having a greater knowledge base.
Mhm.
Because otherwise, where do you pull? And I think you hear all these different things. And I love both our organizations in the fact that it's purely independent. And I always say to parents, there is no hidden agenda here. You might not believe everything you hear. You might disagree with some bits, but you've got to know the absolute intention of this is to help support you, and there's no there's nothing hiding what's pushing that. You're not funded by
Mhm.
another organization saying you need to say this, you need to say that. It's purely to help them be more self-aware and make good choices. I think that's important for both of us, really, in both our work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what's been missing in the industry. And obviously, you've been doing this a lot longer than I'm the new kid on the block in terms of the resource that we provide. But that's the thing. It's knowing that parents do feel like when they're in these environments, whether it's grassroots or whether it's academy, that they don't really feel that empowered to explore or to ask questions or that it's transparent even, or what they're being told is doesn't have a hidden agenda. So absolutely, I think this is, we're in a time and age now where we want, both of us want to provide as much sort of opportunity for exploring and learning and hearing shared stories and wisdom and guidance from other parents, from siblings, from aunts and uncles, from experts in the industry as well, that's not coming from the institutions themselves.
Yeah,
And I think that it's such an important space for parents to feel safe, that
yeah,
they're not going to be judged or under scrutiny. We're simply saying, here is a set of different bits of information in different formats. Everyone has different learning styles and ways of understanding and different ability to understand cultures and languages, that there's something here for everyone to
yeah.
take from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, feeling safe to explore, and you hear about it a lot. You think about the sidelines at football. I think about some of the conversations that take place. I even worked in gymnastics, where one gymnastics club said, I think we've got the most toxic viewing balcony in the country. And I'm thinking, well, that's not a good thing. It's not something to be proud of, that we really want that title. And in
Mm,
many ways, I said, you know what? I wish nobody knew who I was in this environment, and I wish nobody had ever seen me before, and I could have just come in and sat on the balcony
mm,
for a week and done a couple of sessions just to hear what was actually going on.
yeah.
And then you get parents then, and then it's like, well, who are we actually listening to, guys?
Mm,
Somebody comes, you think you're doing a good job with your kids, you're doing your parenting based on what you know, and then somebody can come out with a statement or something that they're doing with their child, and we suddenly doubt absolutely everything that we're doing for our own kids, and we start to panic, and then we think we need to change it, and then we hear one version of it. So some parent thinks they know what a coach may be thinking. No, we don't know what a coach is thinking at all. You don't know whether that's an A team or a B team. You don't know whether they've mixed them up or they're trying people out. You are purely guessing. But I think the problem is, if they're never provided with understanding information in the first place, I don't think anybody can then blame them for second guessing and coming up with their own version of reality. And I think that's for all of us, clubs, us, everybody that works in the space.
Yeah. I mean, that's also a society problem, isn't it? Or challenge, because we're hearing lots of, you know, information, misinformation from all sorts of sources and social media or on different platforms and newspapers and stuff like that. So we're used to just hearing stuff and believing it and not questioning and not exploring ourselves. It's information is just delivered so easily in one format that you read it, you see it, you move on without actually thinking, actually, let me explore that a bit further. Does that sound right? Does that? Yeah. And I think the challenge with sport, or certainly with football, which is what the area that I'm familiar with, is that now we can have a chance to explore a bit more. Like, we're not just having to Google about how to work with an agent or to Google, how to communicate with a coach. We can access platforms like yours and like mine and actually listen to various bits of information from credible sources, so we can do our research in that way. And that hasn't really been an area that's been plentiful in the past. So yeah,
and it's as you say, it's a really exciting space. I want to go back to your innocence of learning about the industry, because I think you then took it to a whole new level. So we talked to parents about informing yourself about the journey, but you went and did a little bit more than that, didn't you? So tell us all a little bit about that. When you were sort of thinking, God, I could do with knowing a bit more, what did you decide to do?
Yeah, I was a bit of a psycho. Listen, I think what informed my decision was that my son Myles was about 11 and an agent called me. I was on the way to pick up a school uniform, I think, and I literally I pulled over because he was on a tour. So the words were, I'm calling to find out about Myles. I'm like, oh my goodness, he's like, what's happened? He's away. Anyway, it was an agent and they wanted to build a relationship. And at that point, I knew absolutely nothing. I honestly didn't. It just, I was like, well, I was annoyed because I'm like, well, what? Like, my child is 11. What on earth would you want with an 11-year-old? For me, the common sense thing was he hasn't even developed. Like, he's young. He's just enjoying it. So it was a natural reaction that only had one outcome, and that was absolutely not. And then I think the following year, a brand approached to endorse him. Again, for me, and it's a personal choice, it was not something I wanted him to be involved in at that age. He was just too young. He was still, finding out what his own personal style of clothes. I didn't want him head to toe in a brand. He was still deciding on which boots suit him better. So again, I think it was just something that in my situation, and also the club gave them free boots, which I understand that not all clubs do when the childs are young. But I didn't want free stuff. I didn't want him to feel that he'd arrived. Like, it was really important for me. And also not understanding the contractual element of what does this all mean? Like, it's just too much too soon. So we were able to hold that back for some time. And at that point, I thought, well, okay, there's these things coming our way with regards to his development and his talent, but I don't feel equipped to be able to respond appropriately, other than to say no, which is my gut instinct. But will there be a right time, and when will that be? But I need to know more. So I did. I kind of went the other extreme, and it was coming up to COVID, and I studied for a master's in football business, because not just to support Myles, but to understand the football industry. Like, what is it that makes people kind of, just get really obsessive about it? And again, I don't have footballing parents or a team that I've supported all my life. So I didn't quite understand the culture of football or the tribalism of football or where the money comes from in football and how much money is in football and why does everybody want it? And why does everybody want to make money for? I don't understand all of that. And I was really fascinated to get a richer, deeper understanding. Which I did. But I think that the thing that came out the most from doing that course was we had to do a dissertation, and I decided to do mine on the parent experience of supporting a child in an academy from when they're 15 to 20 or 21. So I studied and researched. I did a qualitative study. I interviewed 18 parents from all different clubs in and around London. And I didn't pick Arsenal as a club. In fact, I didn't know many parents that well of those age groups. So and I got such diverse perspectives of their journey and what they were challenged with. And that was a big eye opener for me, because some of it I resonated with absolutely. Some of it I was like, wow, I do have support from, a dad and friends, and I can carpool and all that sort of stuff. And some people didn't have that, right? I had a mum who expressed that she felt hassled by agents calling her when her son was sort of 15, 16, and didn't know how to deal with it. She'd never been in front of people that was so so knowledgeable about the industry and so skilled at what they were doing. And everyone's offer sounded great. Like, what do you do? But she felt that was a challenge for her because it's relentless. And I remember her saying, she had to literally like turn her phone off for days on end, because when it would go back on, she would be hassled again. Other parents felt very differently about the agent world, and they had a very positive experience. And others talked about sports law and not understanding contracts, and or even being confident enough to sit in a room with a sports lawyer. And so all these challenges, it actually, and even host families. Like, I remember there was one family who they mentioned that their son went to live at a host family. And the host family had a cat, and the cat would come in the room at night and sit in the boy's bed. He'd never grown up with animals before, so he just couldn't sleep. And it was months before they sort of were able to articulate that to the club, because he couldn't train and he lost focus. And there was all sorts of challenges, but I think the commonality was that they didn't know where to go for support. They didn't know how to ask for support. And whilst, club would be open to hear it, if you don't feel empowered to ask those questions, then, that causes stress and anxiety for you, and therefore at some point for your child. And that was where I realized, wow, that there's a bigger challenge here. And I think that the industry could be enriched in all areas if parents are better resourced, have the support that they need, know the questions to ask, feel comfortable. That in turn will help the conversations that they're having with the clubs, with the agents, with the brands. The expectations are better managed on both sides as well. Equally, we have agents that say, parents come into the door and the first thing they want to know is, when's their mortgage going to be paid, or the money they're going to get for the car. Now, if you're hearing on the sidelines that Joe Bloggs got the house paid off or got £15,000 for their son to be signed at age 14, then you might think that that's a good idea to go and ask the same thing. So it's about not educating, but having the information and stories and wisdom from all areas, so then you can make those informed decisions. And that was really the inspiration for having the platform, is bringing the industry together to support the parent journey, and vice versa to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think looking at it from the other side, clubs, coaches, and we work with lots of staff as well. And the reality, if we're being really honest with it, is because of all the different things that have gone on, and maybe some of parents' attitudes, perhaps lack of understanding, perhaps the way they've gone about it, it becomes very easy for coaches and institutions, not just in football, this can be across sports, to say, actually, do you know what? You just stay over there and leave us to do our job. And actually, that's not benefiting anybody. But I can see the side of coaches. You know, having been on the end as a coach, the receiving end of the late night email full of Sauvignon Blanc telling me I'm the worst person ever to have worked in sport or education because I haven't selected a child or I haven't done this during the course of your career. You can see why then, with human nature, coaches just say, "Oh, just keep them out of my way. I'm here to coach football." And actually, what we've got to do, no, we have got to get expectations in the right places on every side. We've got to establish acceptable boundaries, because everybody's in this. Everybody's in this. Everybody's got to understand perspectives. Everybody's got to understand the roles, because ultimately we're trying to create the best environments for young people to thrive and potentially become, you know, high performers. And we've all got a huge part to play in that.
Absolutely. And I think boundaries is important and balance is important. And communicating what those are is
Yeah,
important. And I think it's all right to say, keep them at arm's length, but that actually fuels the fire. I think
yeah,
when you don't know about something, it's natural to get stressed and anxious about it because you don't know about something. So then it causes, it's like this vicious cycle of, okay, well, how do I know? They're not going to tell us then what I need to do. And then, and it just spirals out of control. And I think where our service is, yours and ours, is around, how can we share knowledge and information so that you feel settled, you feel, okay, I get it now. Football's a business, right? So if we can just keep it real on both sides, I think that will go a long way. But again, it's how we do that.
yeah,
How can we share that information? And also, look, there'll always be parents, there'll always be institutions and clubs and coaches that, they have their own way of working, and what they do and what they say is what they do and what they say, and you're never going to change the way they are.
yeah,
But I think with more access to information, and openness of communication, and having, you know, resources that are developed by people that actually really care, I think will go a long way to helping the industry as a whole.
yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely been a shift, Marcia. I mean, you're sort of, making inroads into it now, but I think over the last few years, I said to you, off air, we'll have done, I would have
Mm.
thought, over 50 clubs. I would have thought across the Football League and Premier League. I think that would have been unheard of 3 or 4 years
Yeah.
ago. And
Yeah.
it's just growing. And I think that openness and actually realizing that, as you say, and again, I do think it helps that you're independent, because I think then anything you say, actually, you're not maybe upsetting somebody who behaves in a certain way because you don't even know them. You're not maybe asking a question because you've offended somebody who made a decision 10 years ago and doesn't want to say, actually, do you know what? We probably could do with changing this a little bit now. We've all
Yeah.
got to evolve. And I do think that's really helped. I've certainly felt in my relationships with club staff, parents, that has just really helped those conversations and relationships. I think if I'd been within the institution,
Mm.
I think that would have been far more difficult to land and say
Yeah.
some of the things that you've asked and spoken about.
Absolutely. And and you guys have done a brilliant job in opening the doors. And there's, and other organizations too are starting to, to bring those barriers down. And I think what I want to say as well, that, this is a positive shift, from what you've been doing, from what we're doing. It's like we're not trying to cause tension and stress and anxiety or fear. No, we want to get rid of all of that.
Yeah.
Right? We
If we
come with
can, well, I mean,
you-
yeah, that, yeah.
yeah. I mean, I know it's
Whether
like,
we'll get there is another matter, but yes, that absolutely.
right. Yeah, small change is important. I think, and that's the thing. We are trying to be positive about this and positively influence lots of different areas of the industry. And I think with everyone coming together, we've, it's a 360 approach. And sometimes, like you said, like what you've been doing and having different voices in clubs, it does start to shift. And yeah, we hope that the industry will continue being supportive of all of our initiatives that will make the industry better.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now I want to go back to a couple of things you've said around parenting, because I absolutely love this, because I am a bit of a dinosaur. I never lie on these calls. I've never let my son have coloured boots until he was good enough to be paid to wear them, so he has to wear black. I'm a real stickler. If he ever dreams of me carrying his kit or throwing me a water bottle, he'll get what for on actually no. Get a grip here. I'm not your kit man. And the same applies for your daughter. And I love that bit where you talked about even where Myles is now, that he has still not got there. He has still not arrived. He, in many ways, even to have done what he's done, is still now probably at the most difficult jump, the biggest jump. And the stuff that you've talked about with agents as well, about being able to hold off on instant gratification, about the support we provide young performers, that, if they're at 9, 10, 11 and 12, thinking that they've cracked the world, and look at me, and I've got my kit on, and I've got the boots, and somebody's talking to me all the time, and I'm the goal scorer, I'm all of this. It's not healthy. It's not good. Sport's a long journey. It's long, it's arduous, it's hard work. Probably in a society we live in now with instant gratification, sport is not going to be one of those. And it's so important that we don't want to, there's nothing worse, is there, than a young performer who thought they were brilliant and then they stop working as hard because they thought they've cracked it, and everybody's told them how good they are. And the next thing they know, they've disappeared off the cliff and they've been released, because that's not the reality of it. And we've got to really help with that. And you did that. You did that through your own parenting, which I did just because I'm a grumpy old thing. And and I get, because it's glamorous and it can be easy for us to talk about this, but I also get situations where people maybe don't have a lot of money, maybe don't have access to kit and equipment, and maybe then who are we to say to them, you can't take, you know what I mean? You can't take it. I'm always conscious of that when you talk about these things, because what I talk about, I'm sorry, you can't relate to the person in Sri Lanka, where we've done cricket, who hasn't even got a bat and they're playing with branches and it's their way out of poverty and whatever. I'm sorry, we can't have that conversation about how they should feel or what decision. We can help them and talk to them, but we've got to be aware of that, haven't we?
I absolutely, yeah. And everyone's situation is different. I think where we need to do better in this environment is just sharing the knowledge of the situations that can occur. So being open to know that, for example, here's an example. A parent a good few years ago had said that she was being offered some money to sign with an agent. And it was well before the time you were able to sign with an agent. Now, fast forward, her child is now at a very good stage in his development. He can have an agent. He's doing incredibly well. But that company that offered her that money is nowhere to be seen. Like they're not and we've spoken about this several times, they're not a legitimate agency, right? So it's having the understanding, and thankfully she didn't engage back then, but it's having the information and knowledge that if you do X, the consequences are potentially Y, right? And I think that's where we lack the openness and I suppose that sometimes the keeping it basic, just keeping it real. That's fine. If you want to do this, then these are the potential challenges later on down the line. And I think that's what platforms like mine will and yours will help with. so you can make those informed decisions as to whether you want to go down that road. And I don't want us to use the excuse of not having it for not learning about it, not being open to explore, because otherwise, if you just take the short-term view, then it could land you in a much worse place than you started. And that's all. But everyone's open to make their own decisions, of course, based on their situation. And I'm sure, I have always had a job, I have always worked, so we've never had a lack mentality. I'm not going to apologize for it, but we haven't. So when things like that have come our way, it was easy to say no thanks. Actually, we're good.
Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that's not
Yeah.
straightforward for everybody. But having access to information as to the decisions that you could make, I think is very, very important.
And that is for everybody, and that should be
Yes.
for everybody. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I think many of us find, sports parenting teenagers tough. It's a really difficult time. I want to go into that. I mean, what's it been like for you, the teenage years? If you were sort of giving out a few pointers, things that you've sort of seen yourself, or things for the parents to consider. You got any advice for those listening about getting through the difficulties of navigating teenagers? Because I'm certainly finding it tough, hard work, let's say, at the moment.
Gosh, I don't want this to sound cliche, right? But I love this phase. I love being able to have really deep, meaningful conversations. Myles in particular has always been someone that's quite interested in the mind and how the mind works. He practices, gratitude and manifesting and all those sorts of things, which I think help. But equally, he's entering into a world where it can be quite materialistic, right? And where, he doesn't have a big wardrobe, doesn't have many, he's not really been someone to gather stuff. I have a very minimalist life myself, so I don't like stuff. So when you're, as a teenager, you're now, starting to want to experiment with fashion and buy a few things here and there. And so that's my battle. It's like, actually, you've got enough. You've got enough. But in terms of, what I love about sport for him, and being a teenager, is that it keeps him busy, keeps him active. And when you're active and when you're busy, your mind is clear, and so I find that, yeah, even from a hormone sense, obviously he's growing and developing. I feel like it's been quite a steady sort of, progression. There's no sort of massive changes in him as a person.
Yeah.
He's still growing. Hasn't had any massive growth spurts where he's, become that gangly, unsure about himself, his body, and that sort of thing. Yeah, that might still happen. He's 17, who knows? So again, so it's different. It's different. He's a quite homely person. So, it's a bit boring.
Hey, but look,
He's
and
not
I
out
think
there, in the hood or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about home sweet home, Marcia. I think in society today, the safety of home, these young people are going off into the world to try and achieve brilliant things, and we're trying to support them, and actually being able to come home as a real place of safety where they're not judged, they can be themselves. I think it's really important.
It is, but look, I mean, I'm not even saying that it's necessarily, the right thing, because also, is it empowering him to go out there and be assertive and know when to say no? Do you know what I mean? It's like I do feel that there's an element of this journey that kind of mollycoddles him. I live in London. I wasn't raised in London, but I moved to London in my 20s. I had Myles here. But you hear about the big bad smoke and it being rough and this and that, and so you end up trying to sort of protect them all the time. I don't know if that was the right thing, but yeah, so they don't get to necessarily play out, as much as we did in our generation. Or he hasn't taken the bus to training, right? He always had a parent to support him in that, and you could argue that that's not reality for a lot of kids. So is that a plus or minus? For me, it's a plus, because he's safe. He's safe and he's enjoying the journey, and he's not had to navigate, any massive, societal challenges. that I'm sure is to come because of the profession that he's now entering into. So yeah, it's a difficult one because adolescence is different, and now he's 17, and some people would see that as an adult. I don't.
No.
But he's entering into an adult world that will treat him as such. So that's my challenge, I think, at this stage of his new career.
Yeah.
I don't think about what that will lead to. I don't think about, whether he's going to be in the squad in 6 months' time. I just think about right now, do what you do, and I'll
Doing what
be
he's doing on a
happy.
daily basis, and that's
Yeah,
important. I look at
yeah.
the sessions we do. What are they doing today? If they're saying they want to achieve these things, what did he do today?
Mm.
That's the stuff that's important. And the current stuff. Um, I mean, we've obviously you've obviously had quite a few nice highlights recently. I mean, along the way, challenges, frustrations that we all have as parents. Maybe Miles disappointed with how he plays, maybe not getting selected for something he wanted to be involved in. All of those things. Were any challenges for you as parents navigating along that whole journey in particular?
Yeah, well, I think the obvious one for parents or for myself and his dad is the juggling of of the training, and we don't, like, his father and I are not together, so the bulk of the day to day we live in separate parts of London, so we couldn't really share that either. So yeah, the bulk of the juggling and the getting you there, and having that flexibility from work, that it's been challenging at times. But as a parent, it has been a choice to support this journey that he's on. And, I've made it work. And I've also made a choice to enjoy it, not to
Yeah.
feel anxious and like make it work. If there's a problem, I'm finding a solution. Right. So, but for Myles, there's been moments in his experience where he's had an injury, or, he may not have been. I think there was an England call up not that long ago where he didn't go. But I think the fact that he understands the nature of gratitude, he tends to be able to see a positive side to something, right? If you're not going, there's a reason for it, maybe because you need more time to get back from injury, or whatever. So again, doesn't really hold on to those negative moments. He has a way of turning them into a positive. And if I think there's anything I would want to share on that note with parents, is as early as possible. And it also depends on you as a parent, because you might think this is a bit woo-woo, right? But as early as possible to understand the beauty of gratitude, and appreciating what you have in life, irrespective of football. The fact that you can go and get an education, the fact that you've got a roof over your head, the fact that you've got friends and family that support you. Sometimes just taking those moments, I think, equipped you well for the other stuff that comes, and you can just not shrug them off, but you have a great appreciation for the other great stuff that is going on in your life. So yeah, it's the normal up and down stuff, but nothing major. And again, I think the biggest things are yet to come when
Yeah.
you've trained this far to a 17, and you're not getting on the bench, like you're not getting game time as a
Yeah.
young professional. You need to add to play adult football.
Yeah.
So these will be the times that I've really struggling. Not you know not you've had you've been out for 2 weeks, you can't get in the team, or you're not
Yeah.
picked for a tour. I don't think, but at the time, it's a big deal to some
Yeah.
parents or to some children. I appreciate that, but that's life. Like our life in organizations. I've gone for jobs I've not got.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm still here. I've gone for
Yeah.
another job instead.
Yeah,
It's like,
and you know what? I think though, without you even realizing this, Marcia, is that you've helped create that environment, because what you've talked about there is the environment you've created at home about what is normal. I talk in our managing disappointment workshops. What are you framing as normal? What are you framing as failure? What are you framing as success? How are you talking about it? Are you using it to then actually jump on and learn from it and grow and be stronger from it? Or are you playing the game of blame, excuses, overdoing the affection, reacting in a way which is totally out of sync to the actual situation that's going on? But you've done that probably without even realizing that that's not always the case. And actually, the way he's probably able to cope with some of the things he faces is because of that environment we create around young people, which I think why parents can be so influential. But it's hard, and we need help. We need help framing our own experiences and thoughts and looking at them at different ways. Because, as you say, you know, ultimately we are all here to try and help young people thrive, whatever that may look like.
Absolutely. And I think look, this football industry is unique in itself, but it is just a microcosm of other stuff that's going on. And I think that where we could do better is building that community. And it can be quite isolating on the football journey, because you arrive, you know, at the academy, you drop your kid off, they go do their training, you're either watching or, you know, in a canteen, you know, and no one's really talking about anything. You know, there's a lot of small talk. Sometimes you know, you don't really know many people. Sometimes you might feel intimidated by the environment because you might have, you know, a bunch of mums or dads talking about football and you don't really know the sport, so you're not able to engage. Or maybe you're not even at training because you've got 1,000 other things going on at home, or more children to support. So sometimes it can be quite an isolating journey, and therefore it's quite hard to grow and learn, because you don't have that support structure within the environment. And that's why, you know, from the platform perspective, you've got a community of people that have either going through it, that are not in your club. So therefore they don't feel, you know, threatened by, you know, talking to a mum whose child is the same position as yours, etc. And I think that's where you can really start to help put things into perspective by sort of listening to others who have a different perspective to yours, perhaps, and then something might resonate and something might not.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Now, Marcia, I think the best thing, just conscious of time, I think we've covered a huge amount of information there. We have not gone through anything that we planned to talk about and have got off in a whole host of different directions, which I hope our listeners will really appreciate. And I think that what we must put on the table is, you know, a few years from now, as we navigate the next bit and you navigate the next bit with Myles, we will get you back and we can do, I think, installment 2. Because Myles becomes 18 and technically is an adult, parents still have an important role to play, and that's something we're still
100%.
navigating with organizations and talking to parents about what support they need. Then just because your kid's 18, you've still got a role to play. Might be a very different role than the ones that Marcia and I are currently playing, but they're still going to be our children. We're still going to want them to be all right, and we're still going to want to know what's going on. I don't think that ever changes, but our support may look a little bit different. So, Marcia, thank you for joining us on the podcast. As I say, that is an open invitation for a few years from now, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Gordon, for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Check us out at parentsinsport.co.uk.